reading this morning. So get out your hymnals. It's number 443, and it's titled We Arrive Out of Many Singular Rooms, and it was written by Kenneth Patton. So 443. Please read aloud the italicized portions. We arrive out of many singular rooms, walking over the branching streets. We come to be assured that brothers and sisters surround us to restore their images on our eyes. We enlarge our voices in common speaking and singing. We try again that solitude found in the midst of those who with us seek their hidden reckonings. Our eyes reclaim the remembered faces. Their voices stir the surrounding air. But their hands assure us in the gladness of our spoken names. This is the reason of cities, of homes, of assemblies in the houses of worship. It is good to be with one another. I have a time for all, and I wrote it, or at least I put it together. Years ago, passing was required for women who simply wanted to be authors. The following are women who had to pass in order to be authors. In their day, women authors simply weren't published. Author George Eliot was actually Mary Ann Evans. She was born in 1819, and when she published her first novel, Scenes of Clerical Life, in 1957, she published under the name of George Eliot and went on to enjoy phenomenal success with novels such as Middlemarch and The Mill on the Floss. Currer, now that's a strange name, C-U-R-R-E-R, Ellis, and Acton, A-C-T-O-N, Bell, in 1846, published a volume of poetry. These young poets were none other than Anne, Emily, and Charlotte Bronte, and this was their first published work. George Sand was actually Amandine Lucie Dupin, and she was one of the most famous and prolific European writers of the 19th century. She's remembered for her bold lifestyle and many love affairs. As a young woman, she left her husband and with her 2 children moved to Paris, where she lived a bohemian life amongst other artists and writers. In 1832, she published her novel, Indiana, under her newly minted pseudonym, George Sand. So in order to succeed, people sometimes have to pass. But society also has a long history of ensuring that people aren't able to pass. At least those people who are seen as undesirable or even sinful. The Scarlet Letter is a work of fiction by Nathaniel Hawthorne, and it was published in 1850. It was set in the Puritan Massachusetts during the years 1642 to 1649 and tells the story of Hester Prynne, who conceives a daughter with a man to whom she is not married. She struggles to create a new life of repentance and dignity, but as punishment, she must wear a scarlet letter A, which was a mark for adultery. At the time, society wanted sinners to be easily recognized and not to be able to pass as good, God-fearing, and righteous people. And nothing much has changed over the years. People are often labeled through the clothing they are required to wear. For prisoners, originally black and white stripes symbolized the horizontal jail bars in comparison to the vertical bars in jail. So it gives them a sense that they can't get out. The uniforms also made prisoners easy to recognize on the street so that the public could distinguish them from non-criminals. But the uniforms have changed from stripes to jumpsuits or orange shirts since the 1970s. For a while in Arizona, there was Joe's Pink Shorts, worn by inmates at Tent City, a detention facility in Maricopa County. Joe Arpaio served as sheriff of Maricopa County from 1993 to 2017, and he was known for his tough-on-crime approach to law enforcement and his implementation of controversial programs and policies, including the use of pink clothing for inmates at Tent City. The use of pink clothing was intended as a form of humiliation and was part of Arpaio's efforts to create an effective and humble environment for inmates. Despite the controversies surrounding the pink clothing and other policies at Tent City, Arpaio remained a popular figure at Maricopa County and was reelected as sheriff for decades. However, in 2017, Tent City was closed down shortly after Arpaio left office, and the pink clothing has become a symbol of his legendary tenure as sheriff. But even more horrific were Nazi practices used to identify a broad range of people who they decided were undesirable. From 1938, Jews in concentration camps and throughout most of occupied Europe were identified by a yellow star sewn onto their prison uniforms or their regular clothing. This was a perversion of the Jewish Star of David. All other prisoners were designated by easily identified badges with specific colors and symbols sewn onto prisoner uniforms. Criminals and political prisoners were marked with green and red inverted badges. Gypsies and vagrants were marked with black or brown inverted triangles. Gay men and men accused of homosexuality were identified with pink triangles, and Jehovah's Witnesses were identified with purple ones. With their badges and marking system, the Nazis went to great lengths to ensure that no undesirable people could ever pass as respectable human beings. Yes, humanity has often gone to extremes to ensure everyone visually knows who the undesirable people actually are. Our prayer this morning was written by the Reverend Stephen Schick, and it's titled, We the People. Please close your eyes or center yourself in whatever way that works for you as we enter into a short time of prayer and meditation. Spirit of life, my heart is moved by the passions of those who crafted dreams of democracy and the rule of law out of chaos. While still clinging to slavery and special rights of men and of property, they looked deeply into the well of wisdom and saw that humanity was one and proclaimed, We the people. I pray for the courage to let our lives bear witness to the power of we, the people of this nation and this earth. When we are afraid to speak or act for benefit of all, show us the beauty and power of courage. When we are tempted to abandon the common good for the glory and enrichment of ourselves. Show us the virtue of selfless generosity and hospitality. And when by sure power or will we would claim the right to diminish the worth and dignity of others, grant us the wisdom of humility. Amen and namaste. The following is an article by Nedra Karim, and it's titled, Passing for White, and How Racism Fueled This Painful Practice. It sets the stage today for my service. What is the definition of passing or passing for white? Simply put, passing occurs when members of a racial, ethnic, or religious group present themselves as belonging to another such group. Historically, people have passed for a variety of reasons, from gaining more social clout than the group into which they were born, to escaping oppression, and to even escaping death. Passing and oppression go hand in hand. People would have no need to pass if institutional racism and other forms of discrimination did not exist. Who can pass is a complicated question because it often depends on a specific moment. In order to pass, one must lack or be able to obscure characteristics or traits most often associated with a particular racial or ethnic group. So in some cases, passing is almost like a performance, and people must consciously obscure the characteristic that they know will give them away. In the United States, passing has a specific history with black people and the legacy of the one-drop rule. Born out of white supremacist desires to maintain the purity of whiteness, this rule stated that any person with black ancestry, no matter how far back, was black. As a result, people who may not have been identified as black if you passed them on the streets would still be identified as black on official documents. In the United States, African Americans and black people as a whole have historically passed to escape the virulent oppression that led to their enslavement, segregation, and brutalization. Being able to pass for white sometimes meant the difference between a life in captivity and a life of freedom. In fact, the enslaved couple William and Ellen Craft escaped from bondage in 1848 after Ellen passed as a young white planter and William as her servant. The Crafts documented their escape in the enslaved narrative Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom, in which William describes his wife's appearance as follows. Notwithstanding my wife being of African extraction on her mother's side, she is almost white. In fact, she is so nearly so that the tyrannical old lady to whom she first belonged became so annoyed at finding her frequently mistaken for a child of the family that she gave her away when she was 11 years old to her daughter as a wedding present. Oftentimes, enslaved children, light enough to pass for white people, were the products of sexual assault between enslavers and enslaved women. Ellen Craft may very well have been a relative of her enslaver. However, the one-drop rule dictated that any individual with the slightest amount of African blood be deemed a black person. This law benefited enslavers by giving them more labor. Deeming biracial people white would have increased the number of free men and women, but done little to give the nation the economic boost that free labor did. After the end of enslavement, black people continued to pass as they faced stringent laws that limited their ability to reach their potential in society. Passing for white allowed some black people entry into the upper echelons of society. But passing also meant that such black people left their hometowns and family members behind to ensure that they could never come across anyone who knew their true racial origins. The situation for black people has gotten better, but discrimination has not gone away. Blatant and measurable discrimination still goes on. A recent report showed that homes owned by blacks were easier to sell and sold for more money if the homes were whitewashed. Whitewashing means removing any and all evidence, real or suspected, like photos or paintings or even owner names, that might construe black ownership. And they went further and put photos of white families in the homes to specifically make them appear as if they were owned by white families. Sadly, hiding and being deceptive is still necessary if you are part of a discriminated group and you want to be treated the same as the dominant group. So, due to some arbitrary characteristics, individuals are often prohibited from enjoying or participating in certain aspects of life by other members of society who don't possess that arbitrary characteristic. Passing is when an individual is somehow able to hide or get around the arbitrary characteristic, either through some innate ability or deception. The other members of society often believe, or at least claim they believe, individuals with the specific characteristic are unworthy of full participation in society. These arbitrary characteristics can be fixed or stereotypical. Passing is much more difficult for individuals with fixed characteristics. For example, if you are denied opportunities because you are a woman or because you are black, passing may be extremely difficult. On the other hand, if you are denied opportunities because you are gay, passing as straight is much easier because stereotypical characteristics are not so rigid. But individuals who are able to pass frighten those who are discriminating against them simply because they can pass. Once the passing individuals are on the inside, they might upset the balance of power as new members of the dominant group. And that's exactly what happens, because the arbitrary characteristics don't make any sense, and the individuals with the supposed inferior characteristics are actually perfectly capable of doing what they've previously been prevented from doing, simply because of the arbitrary characteristic. This is possibly why it was such a shock when leading man and heartthrob Rock Hudson came out as gay. He passed successfully for decades as a heterosexual male. But a greater fear for the controlling members of society may be that the roles will be reversed, and they will be treated with the same indignities they inflicted on others, and they will lose their power in society. This was a tangible fear in South Africa when apartheid ended. But let's consider a passing situation a little closer to our everyday lives. I wrote the following from my own home church in Houston. So please imagine for a moment you are in Houston as I continue to read. As we sit here with our mostly white friends in a mostly white neighborhood, we don't need to pass in any way. But get into your car and drive just a few miles into vastly different neighborhoods, and it becomes clear that you don't pass any longer. You could be in a community where all the businesses have signs in an Asian language or in Spanish. Or you could be in a neighborhood where almost everyone you see is black. In all of these situations, you no longer pass. And if you believe many of the erroneous stereotypes about the people who make up the specific neighborhoods, you might be afraid. You might fear that because you are different, you'll be harmed simply because you are different. It's not a good feeling. Fear is never a good feeling. There's often a great deal of shame that goes along with a desire to pass. At least it was for me. From as early as I can remember, every authority figure in my life said being homosexual was harmful and sinful. When I realized that's exactly what I was, I prayed for years for God to take it away. It never was taken away. So I lived with the shame, and my only course of action was to hide and try to pass as something I wasn't. My final year in college, the stress became too much to bear, and I decided to see a therapist. So I scheduled a session with one on the campus at LSU. I vividly recall meeting with Mary Baker. She was about the age of my mother, so she was someone I could immediately respect and trust. I remember telling her my shameful secret that I was attracted to men. She calmly said, "That's okay, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just who you are." It was as if a 10-ton weight had been lifted off my shoulders. She simply confirmed what I already knew to be true. At that very moment, I stopped needing to pass just a little, and the shame I'd lived with for years began to subside. Shortly after I graduated from college, had a job, and felt financially secure, I felt the need to come out to my parents. Prior to that, I feared coming out to them could be a problem if they cut me off financially. That often happens in the gay community, and I wasn't willing to risk it. But then I imagined hearing my mother exclaim, "If you're so proud of this lifestyle, why have you hidden it?" So I graduated in December, got a job in January, and came out to my parents in February. Coming out wasn't as bad as I anticipated, or as easy as I just described. But my parents loved me, and love can overcome many imagined problems. But hiding or passing is not easy or certain. And imagine being afraid that if you are discovered, you could lose your job. When I graduated from college in Baton Rouge, I had 3 job offers. 2 were near Baton Rouge, and the third was in Houston. I accepted the Houston job, not because it was the best offer or the job of my dreams. Those weren't even considerations. I took the Houston job because I knew it would afford me the most opportunities for a gay lifestyle. Houston was huge, and I could hide in plain sight. But that didn't always work out. Just a few years later, after I moved to Houston, I was out on a date attending a play at the Tower Theater in the Montrose, the gayest part of town, somewhere safe in my imagination. At intermission, my date got up and went to the bathroom. Seated next to him were two of my coworkers, a husband and wife. I went to college with the woman, so they absolutely knew me. I was shocked and scared simultaneously. What were the odds? To the best of my knowledge, nothing ever came of that chance encounter. Fears don't always come true, but sometimes they do. And early in my career, being outed was a legitimate fear. The talk I heard around the office about gays or being gay, or even the men who were stereotyped as being gay, was not kind. On the other hand, those men who I knew to be gay, but who weren't stereotypically gay, rose in the ranks of employment all over Houston. This fear never really went away, but greatly decreased over the years. At my last job in Mississippi, I didn't advertise the fact that I was gay. Then Randy had a major health issue, and there was no way I could avoid it. I soon discovered that everyone knew I was gay, and no one cared. And this was in redneck central Mississippi. Life had indeed changed over the course of the last 30 years. But let me emphatically claim, having to pass in order to succeed is both exhausting and frightening. I empathize with anyone who feels the need to pass in order to get ahead. A person seeks to pass for access to what you might be denied if it were known who you really are. That access is for many things like jobs, other opportunities, friendships, and all too often, safety. But another part of passing includes guilt and shame experienced by the person who is passing in some way. The guilt is for being able to pass when others, for a variety of reasons, can't pass, and so they must deal with society's injustices. And for me, the guilt led to shame. Shame for not having the courage to openly be who I really was. I had the courage to come out to my parents, but not the rest of the world. So I always felt some shame, knowing I could pass when others couldn't. And some people are very conflicted with their needs to pass or not. I have no idea how accurate the recent movie Maestro, about the life of Leonard Bernstein, the famous conductor, was. But the movie portrayed a very conflicted man, one who was courageous and unwilling to hide the fact that he was Jewish by simply changing his name and thus pass and be more acceptable to the musical world of that day. But he also had no problem flaunting his bisexuality and multiple affairs with men in front of his wife, while at the same time needing to lie and pass as both a faithful husband and as straight for his children. And then there is the very opposite of passing, trying desperately to live your life authentically as who you know and feel you are. Those people are truly courageous, and I'm talking specifically about trans people. People born either male or female, but they know deep down inside that they are actually female or male. Initially, they try to pass as the other sex by wearing the appropriate clothes and hair, and also by adopting the expected mannerisms. And when possible, they make passing permanent with hormones and operations. All of this is in a quest to be authentically who they know they truly are. Tragically, all too often, society won't allow them. In an article written and published by Jamie Wareham, she says, 320 trans and gender diverse people were murdered in 2023. The Trans Murder Monitoring Report tracks murders reported in the media each year. The vast majority of those killed in 2023 were trans women or trans feminine people. Most were black, and many were sex workers. 80% of those killed were of trans people affected by racism, an increase of 15% from the previous year. Many of the victims were young. The age group with the most victims was 19 to 25 years old. Overall, those between 19 and 40 years old made up 3/4 of those killed. So let me make sure you understand the reality here. These were trans individuals who were females. They dressed and looked like women. And yet other individuals discovered their secrets and murdered them. These women were not passing. They were being who they authentically were, and yet they were murdered for it. In conclusion, my hope and my prayer is that someday passing won't be necessary for anyone, anywhere, because everyone will be accepted and safe to be who they are and who they need to be. But until that day comes, we can be friends and allies to them in our church and in society at large. Amen and namaste.